3, 2.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Let's just give it 1 or 2 more minutes. I'm just waiting for my colleague to join.
It's going to be using the bar open. Well, I'm coming on this side.
Exactly. Thanks. I'm just interrupting because I think that we have some participants that have just arrived. Today our session is an open Q&A session.
Hey, Bethany, can you hear me?
Perfect.
Hi. Okay. sorry for the delay challenges on that. Hopefully it's not taking too long. Do you want to maybe share your screen and we can?
Yeah, perfect.
Apologies, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And it looks like there's Serge as well. Hey, Serge. Great. Okay, well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's able to join us from all over Africa and hopefully all over the world. My name is Jacob Winnicke. I'm a principal consultant at BFA Global, and we are very happy to be here to work with you in this session, which we've called Beyond Mitigation, where we are going to explore opportunities for funding and innovation in climate resilience and adaptation, with a particular focus on small-scale fishers. I'll tell you just quickly a little bit about BFA Global and give you a quick overview of the session, and then I'll hand it over to my colleague Bethany. But first, just a quick minute or two about us. BFA Global is an innovation consulting firm. We are headquartered in Boston in the United States, but we have offices also in India, Kenya, and Colombia, and we have active programs in South Africa, Nigeria, and Mexico. One of our programs is called Catalyst Fund. So 5 years ago, we launched this. It's an accelerator for inclusive fintech startups in emerging markets. We provide non-dilutive grant capital alongside 6 months of venture building to startups in the program. And we also do quite a bit of ecosystem building as part of that program, which includes convening circles of investors and corporate partners, and also just an acceleration of the ecosystem to support those fintech companies. We have to date accelerated 43 startups across 10 markets. You'll see on this slide here the 5 countries of focus at present for Catalyst Fund: Mexico, Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, and India. And to date, 90% of our startups that have gone through the program are still alive, and they've been able to raise over $113 million in follow-on funding. So some good indicators of success. So as BFA and Catalyst Fund, we are exploring ways to extend this work and our programs to supporting early stage climate resilience and adaptation solutions. So we're really happy to be here. Just a quick intro to our session today. So after this intro, my colleague Bethany will give kind of a short presentation on climate resilience and adaptation within the context of small scale fishers, and speak to some of what we've started to see as the need for innovation and funding and solutions in sub-Saharan Africa. And then we'll have a fireside chat with Serge Remakers of Abelobi. Serge will talk a little bit about how they're approaching solution development for fishers and how they think about climate resilience for fishers. And then I will have a short Q&A with Serge following his presentation, and then we'll do a breakout room where our hope is to engage with you, all the people who are participating in this session, to talk a little bit about solutions, about the landscape that you're operating in. We're really eager to learn from people in this session. So with that, I'll hand it over to my colleague, Bethany Canton, who is a consulting associate at BFA. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jacob. Great. So we'll dive right in. I'll give an overview of what we see as some of the problems with resilience and adaptation for fishers. So I think we've all been really dramatically disrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic. It's exposed the resilience weaknesses in our communities, our societies, and our economies. Climate change is another global crisis that's already wreaking havoc on these and other resilience gaps. Communities everywhere are already facing the impacts of climate change. We've seen that through droughts in East Africa or the wildfires in California. Much of the world's climate change focus and attention is on mitigation efforts to reduce emissions. And while we think that's really important, it leaves a large portion of the population that's vulnerable to the already changing climate behind. So we see a critical need to support these communities in emerging markets to build resilience to climate shocks and build their ability to adapt to long-run changes in the climate. In the next 10 years, it's projected that Africa will be the hardest hit by climate change in terms of climate change-related mortality, and this is all while having contributed to it the least. Africa's only contributed 3% of global emissions since 1850. Tropical zones are projected to see the greatest decline in fish catch by 2050 related to climate change. And in a study of national economies, the vulnerability to the impacts of climate change on fisheries, 16 countries in Africa are ranked as highly vulnerable. We see climate resilience and adaptation solutions for Africa as a matter of social justice and part of an equitable recovery from the pandemic as we look to prepare for future shocks. So we focus our work on impacting the lives of two personas, farmers and fishers in Africa, smallholder farmers and small-scale fishers. We focus on these two personas because they provide most of the domestic food consumed on the continent. They provide massive economic value in terms of the GDP, and they employ most of the continent's workforce. They're also the most vulnerable because they're highly dependent on the natural environment for their food and livelihoods, and they're more likely to have lower socioeconomic status. So just for some numbers, 30% of West Africa's population depends on the coast for income, and 50% of animal protein consumed in the region is fish. And coastal areas account for 56% of West Africa's GDP. Fishers are also projected to be heavily impacted by the effects of climate change. The changes in water temperature, along with unsustainable fishing practices, are projected to cause a decline in fish catch by up to 50% in these regions in West Africa, alongside significant changes in the fish species and distribution in Southern Africa. Fishers are also likely to live in coastal areas, so they're at higher risk of flooding, sea level rise, and severe weather events like hurricanes and tsunamis that can impact their health, life, and their physical assets. Increased acidification of the oceans due to greenhouse gases can also have severe consequences for the ability of coral reefs to grow. And coral reefs are home to over 25% of marine fish species. So their deterioration has further impacts on the fish catch. The adverse effects of climate change are already being seen by coastal and fisher communities across Africa. Tropical cyclone Idai that hit Mozambique in 2019 may be one of the worst storms to ever hit the Southern Hemisphere. This is undoubtedly the result of the changing climate causing more powerful storms globally. And declines in fish catch are already being reported across the continent for small-scale fishers. So we know that some solutions already exist to building adaptation and resilience for fishers. We define the solution space by taking a more holistic perspective of fishers and evaluating what solutions allow them to do or achieve rather than by a specific technology or industry. So we see the solution space from this perspective to have 4 pillars. Income is the first, and we see this as the foundation of resilience and adaptation. So some solutions that we've seen provide an increased certainty, amount, or frequency of income to small-scale fishers. The second solution area is day-to-day management. So this improves a fisher's ability to understand and manage risks, activities, and opportunities on a daily basis, like providing them with weather data and predictions. Resilient solutions provide fishers with the ability to withstand and recover from downside risks and shocks. This would be like savings products or insurance. And finally, adaptation and opportunity solutions allow fishers to take advantage of the potential upside and build for the future. So this would be like aquaculture or other options to diversify their livelihoods. We see more innovation in this space as critical to the life and livelihoods of small-scale fishers in Africa. Although some solutions exist, we see that there's really a big gap in the amount of solutions and the distribution of them. there's a massive need globally, and there's an innovation and funding gap for resilience and adaptation. We believe that this gap exists for a few reasons. So the first is that the vast majority of climate finance goes towards large-scale mitigation solutions and projects. And this is true in Africa as well. So in 2019, over 70% of climate-related startup deals went to just 9 companies in the off-grid solar sector. It's a similar story with incubators and accelerators. They're also strongly skewed towards mitigation and renewable energy in particular. Resilience and adaptation is not as easy or as sexy as mitigation. So adaptation and resilience is hard because there's a complex system of factors that impact a person's ability to adapt. This isn't necessarily the case with mitigation, where you can target specific technologies or industries. We also see resilience and adaptation as very difficult to measure. So we have lots of tools and methodologies at our disposal to measure impact and mitigation. And there's a globally agreed metric to do so, which is reduction in CO2 emissions. This ease of measuring has enabled a booming carbon market and climate finance industry. So this is extremely difficult in adaptation and resilience. There aren't yet any globally agreed and adopted measurements for adaptation and resilience. And it's difficult to measure because the impact is usually a non-outcome. So when something bad doesn't happen, or when it happens, but to a lesser extent or with lower negative consequences. So how can we address this gap in solutions? We believe that we need to focus more holistically on vulnerabilities and opportunities around personas. As I've said, a complex system of factors impacts a person's ability to feel resilient or adapt to the future. So we need to understand their whole life and create solutions for all the drivers of resilience in order for them to be successful. Second, we think we need to take bigger innovation risks. This matter is urgent, and we can't wait for solutions to emerge with the scale potential that fit the typical risk profile of what VCs or impact investors are looking for. We believe we'll miss opportunities for big impact. Finally, we think we also need new financing models that are flexible and patient. So it's not enough that we wait for later stage businesses or large scale mitigation projects. So as a first approach to tackle this, as Jacob mentioned, at BFA, we're designing a program that combines a climate solution R&D lab with an accelerator for existing early stage resilience and adaptation startups focused on impacting the lives of small scale fishers and smallholder farmers across Africa. So now that I've introduced a bit about our focus, I want to introduce one of Catalyst Fund's inclusive fintech portfolio companies, Abalobi, to talk about the challenges innovators face in creating resilience and adaptation solutions for fishers. So I just want to explain that we believe Abalobi is a really great example of a resilience and adaptation solution for fishers. They provide a full suite mobile application for small-scale fishers in South Africa, providing them with weather and safety information and market information access, as well as giving local governments a better ability to manage overfishing or illegal fishing. So we believe that weather and safety are critical to keeping fishers safe while at sea, and many of them may be a sole provider to their families. And market information and access and combating overfishing are critical components of increasing the amount and certainty of income for fishers. So now I'll hand over to Serge from Abalobi to continue.
Thanks so much. Thanks for the vote of confidence. Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Serge. I'm one of the founders and MFD of Abalobi, and as you know, was alluded by Bethany earlier on in her talk. We probably one of the very few tech startups working in the small scale fisheries space. I'm not so sure that's a good thing or a bad thing, but we're based in Cape Town. We are a team of about 20 people, and we co-design and implement technology that helps fishers, small-scale fisherwomen, fishermen, self-empower in the value chain, self-empower around safety at sea, as well as fisheries management. And so what I'm going to do, if I manage to share my screen, is take you through a bit of a whirlwind overview of what we do and why we do it in a particular way, and then we can dive straight into a Q&A with Jacob and Bethany and anything that can come through the chat. Please my screen, because I'm now in presentation mode and I'm not 100% sure what you see. You should see a fisher logging his catch.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so I mean, a lot has been said already, but we tackle climate change resilience through what we call fish with a story. And before I unpack that a bit more, I want to just bring home a few stats and a few aspects that Bethany picked up already. I'm not going to repeat them all, but just to say that up to 50 to 65% of the global catch is caught by small-scale fishers. Most of these small-scale fishers operate in an informal economy, and nevertheless, quite a bit of that catch is traded internationally. About 60 million people are involved in small-scale fishers. That's about 90% of people involved in fisheries as a whole. And then, of course, once we start looking at pre-harvest and post-harvest activities, the numbers go up significantly. Up to 160 million people are involved in fishery as a whole. Yet, small-scale fisheries are largely left out of sustainable development initiatives, including the blue economy. And as Bethany highlighted, are the worst affected by climate change. And before I dive into climate change, about a year ago, I read an interesting study that had calculated with pretty rigorous mathematical models that if Africa's fisheries, and I'm talking here about coastal fisheries as well as inland fisheries, if Africa's fisheries were well managed, so optimally managed, they could contribute more to food security than Africa's agricultural potential. Now, that's quite a pretty impressive stat. I read the report a few times, and it struck me. It struck me that we often, focus on agriculture. We see fisheries, as a problem. Everything is overfished. Fisheries is a problem, but yet there's massive potential in fisheries if we can get the sustainability question right. So back to climate change. Climate change has a lot of different effects, impacts in fisheries, many of which are still today unknown. So of course we've heard about storms that increase in intensity, increase in frequency, and that's pretty clear. We've also heard and read about the impact of these storms and the increasing activity in our oceans on coastal habitats and ecosystems. More specifically, there are quite a few changes in nearshore temperatures, increasing temperatures in our coastal waters, which affects water quality, which of course affects species distribution, species shifts. In South Africa, we have an interesting phenomenon where two species of cob are hybridizing along our south coast as those two populations are starting to mix. We've heard about sea level rise, of course, and this is very relevant for small island developing states. And of course, we're expecting some pretty major shifts in our oceans due to climate change, which we're still trying to really understand and grapple with. But of course, small-scale fishers are, while they've certainly not contributed to the climate change trends, are, as Bethany highlighted, some of the worst affected populations around our globe. Within Abelobi, as a tech startup, as a social enterprise based in Cape Town, working in various parts of Africa, we've very much focused on community enterprises, on community responses, and on developing tools and platforms, technology, as well as data solutions that can drive change from the bottom up. one such tool that we've experimented with is tracking devices. How do we kind of go from utilizing tracking devices, from a more top-down angle to bust fishers fishing illegally? How do we turn this around completely and use tracking devices to drive a community response, an early warning and emergency response, and utilize it as a safety at sea tool that can offer then a couple of other opportunities? This is something we run in various parts of the coastline, where communities themselves drive the safety at sea response and trigger responses by launching boats from the harbor, connecting with fellow fishers further out at sea, and engaging with the concept of safety at sea in an increasingly variable environment, where even those fishers who have deep local ecological knowledge around the weather, around the ecosystem, are struggling to predict and to forecast weather patterns and to read weather signals, which of course affects their well-being and their safety. But at the same time, within Abelobi, we wanted to go a step further. How do we connect a tracking device, a safety at sea tool, a data logger, with a logbook that offers the same fishers the opportunity to record their catches, record their income, record their expenses, and basically manage their accounts and get a much better idea of their financial operations, their financial opportunity as an individual, as a household, as a fisher group, fisher business, fisher cooperatives. And then how do we push that data, so the tracking data, together with the data logged through a mobile device, through a digital marketplace? And that's really what Abelobi has become, an opportunity to fishers to drive traceability from the bottom up and connect relatively affordable and easy to use tool with an opportunity to self-empower and disrupt a supply chain, to what we call to rescue value, or to retain a component of the value of this catch at the community level, which in turn creates opportunities for job creation in the fishery, for quality control, for packing, for distribution, for logistics, for marketing. And so Abelobi is a traceability platform, but a bit of a traceability platform with a difference, in the sense that it starts from the fisher logging her or his catch, appending the tracking data, and pushing that product through a digital supply chain that connects the end consumer with that story of who these fishers are, where they come from, what are their main challenges, how do they grapple and understand climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, and fisheries rebuilding. At the same time, I've mentioned already that we're still trying to understand the impacts and the effects and how climate change really manifests itself in a small-scale fishery. And again, using a platform like Abelobi, one is able to connect and integrate data from various different sources to really build a high-resolution picture that allows the community itself, together with its partners, which could be government institutions, scientists, NGOs, to really make much more sense and drive adaptation in their community, in their fishery. Not to forget, of course, that the market incentive and the market opportunity, or that market disruption, also offers an opportunity for fishers to move away from this race to fish. Catch as much as I can, because I'm going to get a low value for it and a low price for it, and the market only wants one or two different species. To again flipping that on its head and fishing with the ecosystem, catching with the ecosystem, with the season, and connecting again with the market for a diversity of species, for a basket of resources that all hold a fair value. So in conclusion, Abelobi is an interesting example of how different components and different tools are being put together to co-create or to offer fishers an opportunity to drive their journey towards climate change resilience, from safety at sea and mitigation and early warning to market access and building community enterprises that hopefully become more resilient to shocks. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Serge. That was great. I really appreciate it to talk us through the approach in the solution space. So I'll spend, I guess, maybe 10 minutes here on Q&A. And one of the things I was going to also suggest at this point is, we do have this, is the chat box available for anyone else. If you have questions for Serge, please go ahead and type them on the right-hand side. You should see a chat box. Additionally, if you have questions for Bethany and I for BFA, please go ahead and put some there, and we'll hope to get to those towards the end. So Serge, I wanted to maybe start with your end user, and maybe work our way backwards from there. So kind of keeping the fishers that you serve in mind, can you tell us a little bit about how they see and experience climate risk in their lives and their livelihoods? Because we've talked a lot about sort of the changes that are happening to extreme weather events, sea level rise, etc. And in particular, like, how do they think about it? Because it's sort of this balance of anticipating shocks, but then also things are changing gradually and it might feel far away. What do you see and hear from the fishers that you're serving, and how they interpret and think about those risks?
Yeah. So, look, fishers are inherently risk takers. They go out in pretty intense conditions, especially small scale fishers. They go out on small boats, very often badly maintained boats, or maintained engines, and especially in an environment where there's market, no market suppression, or fishers remain price takers in the market. Fishers will take increasing risk to go and target particular species that they know will hold value, and they'll be able to sell to the middlemen at the harbor. At the same time, fishers, especially small-scale fishers, operate in kind of a context of tradition and learning and observing the environment through generations. So fishers have a deep local knowledge of the environment and read non-stop and process non-stop a whole range of atmospheric and oceanic signals to calculate that risk. When it comes to climate change, in my kind of experience and in my conversation with fishers, it's quite hard to get to the conversation around the climate, around climate variability, climate change, and really distinguishing what is a seasonal cycle, what is a sort of a more long-term cycle, and what really is climate change, what can actually be attributed to climate change, especially within a broader context where the main issue for the fishers are either rights, accessing the stock and securing tenure, securing rights to those resources. That's on top of most fishers, most fishers' head, and you're basically accessing it, and of course accessing a market or securing a market. So climate change is once again, another thing on top of all the other pressures, all the stressors in the life of a fisherwoman, fisherman.
Yeah, and so it sounds a bit more like they're focused on, like you said, constantly scanning and understanding and responding to risk constantly. I'm curious, what are some of the solutions that you see fishers using right now to try to build their own resilience? So and maybe you could give us an example, when there is a major change that was kind of unexpected, what are they falling back on? How do they kind of preserve their assets and livelihoods? Because that might give us a sense of what the starting point is for climate related shocks as well.
Yeah. So I think the positive adaptation strategies or positive mitigation strategies and the potentially more negative ones. I'll start with the negatives ones and then move over to the positive ones. What I've seen in many fisheries where the right structure, the recognition of the small scale fishery is not really clear, where the collaboration maybe with government or with the fisheries authority around adaptive management in place yet, and where there are very few sort of alternative livelihoods that fishing communities could explore, is that fishers are driven to illegal fisheries, and of course, you know, we might call it illegal fishers or illegal fisheries in the eyes of and the minds of this fishing community. This is about survival and about, you know, catching potentially a different resource, an intertidal resource, a coastal resource that is more accessible, especially when the weather is bad out at sea, and try and market that on a formal legal or illegal market. So we see that, and it's a very acute in the South African context. On the more positive side, I've highlighted that fishers have this deep local knowledge and a really fine-grained understanding of the ecosystem and how the ecosystem interacts, and potentially how changes are being observed and articulated. And I've seen many fishers wanting to express that, wanting to put this kind of knowledge on the table and share this kind of knowledge with the sort of more mainstream science, to really fine-tune what is and understand exactly what is going on and what can be attributed to overfishing, what can be attributed to potential climate change. And in fact, we see that one of the main incentives besides the marketplace for fishers to utilize abelobi is that it, aside from this accounting tool, it offers them an opportunity to kind of streamline this knowledge and these observations within a particular data framework that can be utilized in a decision-making framework, in a collaborative fisheries management framework. So I do see for fishers, you know, that we onboard and we've been working with for quite some time. I see, you know, that as becoming a very strong opportunity to say, well, look, we've got to make sense of what is going on here. These are complex, you know, complex ecosystem changes. Let's bring our local knowledge and sort of other scientific knowledge to the table.
That's great. That's fascinating. So maybe taking it a step back to an early stage company, think about what it's like to form a team around an idea, go through all of the fun, you know, first couple of years of trying to turn that into a product offering, and etc. If we wanted to see another 20 abelobis, or maybe not exactly abelobis, but another 20, you know, sort of companies that are very tech focused, trying to solve inefficiencies and pain points that small scale fishers are facing, and help them get past, you know, the valley of death as a startup, and thrive, you know, I guess as a fisher startup solution ecosystem, if we were to call it that. Like, what do you think are some of the critical enablers that would be needed for something like that to happen? I mean, you could speak from your own experience, or you could also speak from other thoughts on what you think is missing for this to be bigger.
Okay, this is why it's called a fireside chat. I'd love a bottle of wine to go back, but I'll highlight two things. We would love to see many more startups working in the fishery space, working in the small scale fishery space, and approaching it from lots of different angles. There are a few, but they're few and far between. I would argue that there are two main reasons. The one is fisheries are wicked complex problems. Climate change in our oceans is an extremely complex problem. So the level of science, the level of R&D required, you know, to even get to some kind of MVP is pretty intense, or at least in our case has been rigorous. At the same time, and I'll come back to that, and at the same time, of course, perhaps more so than in the agricultural space, fishers have been burnt left, right, and center by lots of different initiatives. So building trust, building relationships, and really spending enough time in that co-design, co-creation space is absolutely critical. And purely approaching it from a tech startup with a financial product or any other kind of tool, it's not going to fly. And really embedding it within the fishery and within the kind of the social fabric of many of these fisheries will be absolutely critical in my opinion. And then Bethany nailed it: patient capital. Angel investment, seed investment in fish. Maybe 10 or 15, impact investors that even go there, and we need many more, to really risk it and have that bring in potentially patient capital. And at the same time, especially in our case, we've approached it very much more from a blended finance angle. So we've raised grant funding and impact investment to do different things. The grant funding has allowed us to work very much on the foundational part, on the community co-development, on the co-design, while the impact and proving the model, while the impact investment is now allowing us to really look at scale beyond grant funding, and to look at replication, to look at getting the technology to a stage where it's interoperable and relatively easily configurable and affordable for a larger group of stakeholders beyond South Africa or the areas where we currently work.
One of the things that we're trying to think about is this question of ecosystem that you started to talk about, right? Like, it would be great if there were 10 or 15 other startups just like you. You could have your own WhatsApp group and you guys could be sharing solutions over WhatsApp, for example. But also where there are opportunities for knowledge, for case studies, for ecosystem level interventions. So I'm curious if there are some examples of that you can see for startups for the fisheries ecosystem. You describe it being very complex, right? There's a lot of this understanding of the science side of things that you need to do alongside your own tech, alongside your own business, fundraising, etc. Are there some of those pieces that may be common that could be centralized, or relationships with universities? I'm just curious about if you have some thoughts on what are some of the missing pieces at the ecosystem level.
Look, in terms of sharing case studies, in terms of stimulating this type of startup, or startups willing to or keen to dive into the marine space or the fishery space, obviously this platform is a great example. And I'm really excited about the work that Alexis and his team are doing to drive this type of ecosystem in Cape Town rather than in Norway or the States or wherever. So kind of having it based, right at the coalface, being able to work directly with fisher communities that are half an hour away, I think is absolutely critical. And then, of course, you've highlighted the science part. I think there's quite a supportive network from a kind of a fisheries research, fisheries science angle. What I think is perhaps a missing part is coming back to that concept of embedding it and working directly with fisher organizations at local level, but also at regional and global level, and really bringing these organizations in the kind of the founding phase, the ecosystem space, to drive this kind of innovation, and once again embedding this innovation in the coastal communities rather than coming from the outside.
Great. Okay, I'm just looking at the time. I could certainly continue talking to you for 3 more hours. But I think what we're going to try to do now is go ahead and see if we have the chance to enable camera and video for participants. So rather than using a breakout room, if you have any questions for us or for Serge, if I'll just check in the chat and see if we do have that capability. Yeah, so just be patient with us for a second, but we'll see if we can enable that. Maybe I'll ask you one more question. I'll sneak in one more if I can. So I like to ask this question sometimes. What's one example of an entity, which could be anything, a business, it could be a company, it could be a funder, it could be a government that is not yet focusing on solutions for fishers, but that we think will be needed to really scale impact. So this is an entity that's not yet involved, but if you think in the next 10 years, if we want to improve the lives of tens of millions of fishers, this profile needs to be brought in, what does that look like?
Jacob, look, I think the impact investment space needs to dive in from early stage all the way to Series A, Series B. I think there's a lot of apprehension. I mean, we've spent about a year raising impact investment successfully, but it did take us a year and many chats and really interesting chats with people who were really keen, but the risk and the profile and the complexity in fisheries does require a larger group of people to to signal that they're willing to dive in, and that there might be lessons and tools and opportunities from the agricultural sector that can be transferred, but that they also require their own innovation and their own journey.
Yeah, I see so many angles to making it interesting and attractive to impact investors beyond just the benefits to oceans and to fishers. There's climate change, financial health, etc. Go ahead.
So there's, if I can just carry on just a little bit, there's quite a bit of impact investment now looking at investing in fisheries. So in the return on the fishery, investing in the fishing company, in the fisher cooperative that holds the fishing license. There's quite a bit of that. There's some interesting pilots underway, but there are very few impact investors, at least early stage impact investors, wanting to really dive into more the startup space, especially around technology and fisheries.
Okay. Let me just do a quick check-in. Bethany, do you know if it's possible for other people to chime in right now with questions if they have them?
Yeah, so if you want to join us with video and mic, you can click the Go Backstage button, which is should be at the top of your screen. And while we're allowing other people to join, you guys can continue.
Yeah, actually, Bethany, would you mind sharing? Let me just share my screen to show one slide sort of before we, or if Bethany, actually, if you could.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, sorry. I froze for a second there. Great. So before we sort of jump into the discussion, I just wanted to reiterate that BFA Global and Catalyst Fund, we are actively exploring how we can engage in the climate and resilience space. And as Bethany mentioned, we see a lot of opportunity for solutions for smallholder farmers and small scale fishers. Those are the two personas that we would like to focus on. And we are really eager to learn about both the solution space and the funding landscape for early stage companies. So if there are people participating in the session or looking at a recording of it, we would love to hear from you. We have a climate action page on our website. There's a link here on this slide where you can learn a little bit more, and where we also have an expression of interest form. So if you are an early stage company, you are active in the space, we would love to hear from you, because we are trying to design this program And the more that we can understand about the solution space and organizations that are out there that we might be able to work with as and when we're able to launch a program, that would be great. Thanks for letting me intervene at that point. Great. So I guess we don't have any questions coming in. I can throw another one out there. Let's see here. So this is kind of also a thinking about the next 5 years question for you, Serge, and sorry for putting you on the spot with these, but hopefully it's fun. What's one application of technology in sort of the Fisher problem space that you think is missing right now that shows a lot of promise for impact? And it might not be something you guys are even thinking about as Abelobi, but where you've maybe thought, oh, it would be wonderful if someone was working on that.
Yeah.
Any thoughts there?
Yeah. I'm going to say blockchain, but I'm not going to say. No, I would say InsurTech. InsurTech, something we want to connect with and sort of integrate with other startups or other companies working in that space, but really nailing the model around insurance for small-scale fishers with a very variable income would be key. It's something we are after, and we scanning the landscape very carefully to potentially partner with groups that are willing to experiment in that space, large or small. Looking at, of course, life insurance, and potentially looking at asset insurance, looking at boats, engines. Although, of course, how do we kind of get the model right and the algorithm right to ensure that the premiums remain affordable and doable for small scale fishers or small scale fisher cooperatives as a group. So I would say that one. I could talk about AI and blockchain, but I think from a priority point of view, definitely that one.
Great. I see we do have one person. Looks like, do I need to do anything to enable Luke? Luke, if you're able to hear me and you want to jump in, and if you have a question for us or for Serge, please jump right in.
Hi guys, I'm just here from the OHA team, just checking if everything's working. So yeah, don't have any questions, but yeah.
Okay.
See that things are working out.
Great, thanks so much.
Where do we see how many people are watching this? It would be great to stimulate a bit of a conversation. It is late afternoon.
Last session of the day. I think we're competing against a conversation with investor session as well. Maybe I could ask Bethany the same question. With your understanding of fishing communities, what are you excited about as a possible area for applying technology, particularly with resilience and adaptation?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think there's a lot of places where, like, what we've worked on in the fintech space, I think can be applied to small scale fishers. So a lot of the same solutions that are already existing for smallholder farmers. So like any sort of rent to own model for assets, like for boats or engines. We're already seeing a couple models like that pop up. And yeah, insurance products, savings products, access to markets, access to inputs, things like that. So yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity to blend fintech to support the small scale fisher space.
Any other questions from anyone? I see it. Hi, Alexis. Hey. What are you excited about as a possible area for applying technology?
I didn't hear this.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think. I think it was just background noise. I think we can continue.
I thought it was a question. So Bethany, I mean, we might as well keep going. This is an interesting one, because we can, especially when we talk to BFA, we can certainly pitch Abalobi as a fintech company. Yet, we operate electronic catch documentation and traceability systems. That's what we do. Yet, and for a reason, we felt quite strongly that we needed to get, that stepping stone right. Fishers logging a catch, connecting with a marketplace, running digital transactions on this marketplace before we can even dream about experimenting with various financial services. That's the Abalobi story. That's kind of where we're going. We see the financial services is a critical component to scale this and to really deepen the scale, deepen the incentives and kind of the adoption of the platform. But we needed to kind of build that layer first where fishers can use this tool to operate and connect with a digital value chain. I'd be quite interested maybe in Jacob and Bethany's cultural sector was not needed, and you could come in, more directly with a financial service or financial product.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think I'll give a response, and maybe Bethany, if you want to follow up. This is actually getting at what I was about to ask you, which is related to how and when is it the right time to intervene with something that is digital first? And part of the conversations that we've been having with people in the agriculture space is focused on getting an understanding of the tools that people are using now, feature phone versus smartphone, the things they're doing with it now, receiving payments for crops that they're selling. At what point in time do they receive that crop? Is it when they hand over the crop, or is it at a later date? Understanding kind of the dynamics of what's being used now to then inform how far you can go with your technology and what it needs to be kind of designed around. I think in the agri space, we're still a little early in our exploration of that as well when it comes to climate resilience and adaptation solutions. But there are things that have been tried in the past that have been not done with a fintech component. That I think what we're seeing is a lot of companies seeing ways to make it more efficient, more affordable, improve distribution with a fintech approach. So an example could be, loans for assets, productive use assets on the farm. That happened well before there was mobile money, well before you could embed a chip in that piece of equipment and monitor its usage remotely and turn it on and off. But now innovations are happening where that need for a productive use piece of equipment is now being made possible in new ways, in more flexible ways, and is creating data from transactions and interactions and things like that now make it more attractive as a fintech approach. And I think similarly with other areas where there is finance already happening, whether that's finance for a farmer to purchase or acquire inputs ahead of when they would have the funds to actually acquire those. Now the businesses that are coming kind of with a fintech first angle are able to kind of piggyback on, there's an existing set of financial transactions that happen, but they're happening informally, or they're happening without data and without fintech. And there's sort of this opportunity to go in there with that first. Are we out of time? I think we may be out of time. Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much to both Bethany and Serge for taking the time, and for Alexis and the team for inviting us. This has certainly been really useful for us. And as I mentioned, we are very eager to hear from anyone who is interested in this space, thinking about resilience and adaptation, thinking about climate change in the oceans and fisheries context, please feel free to reach out to us, and yeah, we'll share our deck, and thanks so much for everyone.
Both of you, nice to connect again.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Absolutely. Okay. Bye-bye.